the stuff that I want to speak about today around innovation, Aboriginal perspectives, Aboriginal cultural and spiritual contexts, particularly around the environment and caring for country or healing country, are really critical that not only Aboriginal people have an understanding of this and a respect and a recognition, but that obviously there's far more non-Aboriginal people involved in these industries and these sectors, and the issue of owning land, because our people have been, as we know, dispossessed through this colonial process and period. So the work that we've got ahead of us as Australians, as human beings, is really critical in that we are seriously running out of time. So we don't have time to ponder policies or strategies or perspectives or interests. Nature doesn't wait for anybody, and so the sun comes up regardless of how we're feeling. We are mere mortals, essentially, and the collective power of humans is no match for nature itself. So, however, we have changed, as human beings, we have changed the course of nature and the behaviour of nature even, without actually knowing what we've done to create that. So, the Nyoongar perspective and context around, I guess what we want to talk about today is, this great concept of using chess to represent the challenges, to represent, the opportunities that I think we've really got to think about in terms of climate change and the situation of the environment. So just let me set up this slideshow, because as a blackfellow we're very graphic. So I'm a storyteller, I guess, but I also understand and appreciate that that our stories are better when we can see stuff. And I know my mum preferred to see pictures. Hang on, Tom, what am I doing? Just looking through this. I'm an Apple person, so is that right? Now, how do I get that to go like that? And there. Tom, can I just get you to, oh, there it is. No, got it, sorry. So, first of all, I just want to start with an acknowledgement and a welcome of our country here, because this place that we stand on is part of the Whadjuk language connect for the Noongar nation. And so there's historically and traditionally there are 15 language groups. We are, as Noongar people, we are the biggest cultural bloc in Australia. So there's 15 dialects of Noongar from Geraldton, including Geraldton town, even though the Yamajis have claimed it in recent times. It's still traditionally Noongar Boodjar, all the way down through places like Dandaragan, Quarter, out to Wildcatcham and then Southern Cross, and then all the way down to Esperance, and then the coast all the way around. So Whadjuk Boodjar, is this metropolitan, essentially the metropolitan area bounded by the rivers and the Darling Scarp, so the Helena River all the way up to Lake Joondalup, and then down to the Belia, Budgar country of the Peel districts, and then bordering into places like Pijara and Mandurah, obviously. So Whadjuk Boodjar is obviously the place where most people live in our society. This representation of a beautiful piece of art by Giliungu is Lane's Chad, to me represents a fantastic understanding that even though the skyline is a very modern landscape, a very recognised modern representation of Perth, and obviously the Swan River and the current identity of Perth as a place, it's got this below the surface, in the ground, in the earth, in the history of the humans and the animals and the biota that have existed on Noongar Boodjar, on Whadjuk Nyoongar Boodjar, is just below the surface. And so places like Benenborough, the Yaraguia, the Perth Waters area, between Guma, which is the Elizabeth Key, and Budgar, which is the South Perth foreshore. Beenambura is this part of the river. The Yaraguia is the whole river. And someone said the other day that we're not really sure that Yaraguia is the whole river because there were so many sacred places that had very specific names. So we don't see, as Noongar people, we don't see the river as just one identity. It's got many, many identities. And likewise, a lot of the territories of our sacred lands has very specific meanings, very specific connections. And so the totem system and the connection and the connectivity of the humans, the individuals and the collective clan groups and bloodlines gives us this very intricate and very complex understanding of the spirit of the land. And so in our language we say Whadjuk Nyoongar. And Europe, Nunuk Nija, Warkor Nija, Karin Yinning, Nanwang Nija, Moort Nija, Yinning, Boodjar. Demaga Mamaga, we're in Europe, Dinning Nunuk Nija, Warkor Nija, Wadjak Boodjar, Nija Muru, Wadjak Boodjar. Yaraguia, Mamagurba, Nija Moort, Moortonok Nija Boodjar, Barangla. Ngala Moort, Ngala Ngapa Boodjar, Nija Wadjak. So we are Wadjak people. Yaraguia is this territory on this side of the Yaraguia or Beenambura, the Bulubilia, Perth waters, and Yaraguia's territory extended from Kings Park and further south all the way up to Joondalup. There were other of the other old grandfathers whose territories were identified because, and that's not to say that we had these chieftain systems, and they weren't kings and they weren't the only people, but the identity was made by a system and a leadership of white men, essentially, when they first landed here. So they gave us and our territories an identity under this patriarchal system and structure, but that's not our structure. So Yaraguia and Yagan and Mijuguru and Weep and the other men that are identified as the territory kings or chiefs, if you like, because that was the concept and the understanding of our social order and structure. But it was far from it, because we didn't have it. Because for Yaraguia there was a very powerful, equally powerful old woman who never got mentioned, who didn't get identified. And so women are very important. Women are critically important in life, obviously, we all know that. And in our old culture, women play a very, very significant part. So the wealth of the country and the identity and the connection of Boodjar is a really important part of, I think, the chess game that, as I've said to Tom, that we play on the black checkers, the black corners, the black pieces. And our pieces are, as the artist identified in his piece, that sometimes the black disappears, sometimes we become invisible. And so how the game is played fairly is beyond us. We have not been a part of the fairness of this society that has flourished on our tribal lands. This sacredness in that previous slide represents the spirit of the land. And this spirit is well and truly vibrating. It's resonating with many, many peoples, not just the Noongar people, not just the custodians. Right. COVID proved to us that spirituality, that connection to nature, right, is very, very important to our existence as human beings. And of course for the world itself. So biodiversity is declining rapidly. Australia, I saw something the other day on the news that Australia was recognised as the fastest destroyers of species and on the planet. I mean, are we proud of that? So when I speak to groups or I speak at functions and forums, and usually it's with interest groups like the regenerative ag or the ecologists or the environmentalists, I often challenge them very quickly because I think we've got to stop being patronising and passive in our conversations. As human beings, whether we're Noongar, whether we're Australian, whether we're a social worker. The issue is, as human beings, our life and existence on this planet is in serious danger. Why? Because we have destroyed the very elements of nature that make it what it is. So we can't continue. The economy, I think someone said during COVID that COVID showed us that the economy was at war with the environment, and the environment won. Right? So powerful economies, money, greed, capitalism, intellect, science are all constructs of us as human beings. They are not natural. But we construct them in a way, and then we disempower nature. We pay no respect to what is real by simply creating something that makes us powerful. And then we all yearn for this power. So this is a crazy system that we exist in. Our Nyoongar mob and our Indigenous groups globally lived in a similar way to us mob. First Nations people, Indigenous groups, traditional owners, custodians of land and culture and first law. Right? Because as human beings, everyone is connected to their first law in some way. The difference between yourselves as non-Indigenous, non-Nyoongar, non-Aboriginal people here, sitting here right now, is that your first law happened maybe 1,000 generations ago, and you separated or moved away from, as a society, as a bloodline, you became more connected to this new system and this new way of seeing the world, seeing nature itself. Whereas us more, the Nyoongar and the Aboriginal people, the First Nations people, the Indigenous people globally, Heidi, what do you think? We are maybe 3 generations. We are maybe 50, 60 years removed from that first law. My mum passed away and we buried her on the 23rd of last month. And my mum was a connection to an old culture. Look, my mum was the living connection for me, my kids and my siblings, and of course us as Nyoongar people, because mum was a matriarch, a genuine matriarch. And I talk about mum in the context of the 88 years that she lived, the 90 years that her mum lived, and then the 90 years that her grandmother lived. And my daughters and my children, and my daughter actually gave birth to my first grandson 3 days after mum passed. So there was this, in recent times, just in the last month, there's been this wonderful mourning and tragic, part of our family and sorry business, and this beautiful re-emergence of life and another generation, in our family, in our Nyoongar community. But what Bridget, my daughter, who had a beautiful relationship with my mum, what Bridget accessed very clearly was a connection to stories and history, language and knowledge, sacred knowledge, that literally went 88 years, 90 years, plus 90 years, plus another 90 years. Nearly 270 years, obviously, that takes us to pre-colonisation. So Nyoongar people and Aboriginal people, as storytellers, as holders of sacred knowledge, even though we don't own this land, even though we don't have authority to make decisions and determinations about what should be happening, our knowledge is still here. Does that make sense? So these are the things that we work on. The knowledge that Nyoongar people have around our 6 Nyoongar seasons is really another demonstration of how our society and our economy, operate. So, we had this issue of balance is a really important part, and this is one of the things that society and knowledge, science and business and commerce and politics and all these introduced ways of thinking and doing has disrupted a natural balance in the world. And this is at a global scale. This is happening. You can't cut down trees and destroy these magnificent ecological systems, right, in a place like the Amazon and expect there to be no impact at a natural cycle, a natural systems function or operation. So the world is changed the minute you cut down enormous swathes of, you know, magnificent old growth forest trees. The minute you clear land of all vegetation and bring in introduced species of animals and plants, and you change the ecology of the land itself, you change the topography of it, and the geo physical nature of the natural world. You can't do that. You know, physics, and I'm not a physicist, but I understand that the world is an imbalance, and when things move this way, something happens on this side of the world, or in this part of our natural system. And we see that with La Nina and El Nino, and it's happening right now. The floods in the East Coast, you know, where a couple of years ago it was massive fires. What lies ahead for, you know, this town, particularly around this issue of fire? You know, there's places in the hills, and I spent 18 years as a firefighter, and I know, I walked through the bush up there in Kaartdijin, the Darling Scar, and I know that there are areas that have not seen fire for 50 years or more. And so there's this massive fuel uploading that essentially is a time bomb. And when that stuff goes, because of the flammability of our natural, you know, eucalypts and our natural, our native bushes and grasses and so on, it explodes quite literally. I don't know if anyone's seen a wildfire or bush go, but a lot of our trees, a lot of our native trees, literally, they go like matchsticks. So balance is important, and this was the law that prevailed in the mindset and the kinship structures, the kinship laws and the cultural values that Nyoongar and Aboriginal people held. And this is what we achieved by understanding that balance, by staying humble, right, within the system. Nyoongar nature, Nyoongar culture, essentially the law is to humble yourself to nature. You don't sit above it. Right? Young people are told you don't even, you know, kids love to pick up sticks and just drag it across. Young kids are severely punished for scratching the mother's, you know, features of, you know, on the ground, the natural ground, as a way of teaching children, no, don't disrespect, you know, this beautiful ground that is sacred to you, that provides for you. And so those sort of teachings and learnings continue all the way through. Intimate knowledge of that country, you know, a meaningful life that had function and purpose. Right here in Nyoongar Boodjar, we know that this was a very, very rich wetland system, ecological system, you know, particularly in the, from the Swan River and close, you know, to these areas that we're standing on right now. And so we know that, you know, on a daily basis, Nyoongar people literally gathered up and hunted for no more than 90 minutes a day. And in 90 minutes, the clan, the men would do their stuff and the women would do theirs. And in 90 minutes to, you know, a couple of hours, there was enough sustenance for the day gathered up for the whole group. So in 2 hours of labour, if you like, of hunting and gathering and providing the sustenance for the group, everyone was fed, everyone was looked after. Nothing was overfished or overhunted or overgathered. So the country was hardly even impacted. Everyone was fed. And then there was a luxury, really, of, on a 24-hour basis, a luxury of 22 hours that the parents, the elders, the women and the men separately and together could commit to those other aspects of life. You know, the social, the emotional, the psychological, the spiritual. So people conducted ceremonies of all sorts for the kids, for the women, for the men in those other 20-odd hours. Obviously there was sleep involved in there too. So our life was absolutely meaningful and functional and rich. Right? We lived with abundance every day. absolute abundance. Because everything that you might like to eat today, whether it's the snapper, whether it's the marron, whether it's the prawns, whether it's the crayfish and all those beautiful seafood species of fish and crustaceans, or whether it was the bird life, whether it was, you know, the meats and obviously the smaller lizards, which I know you've probably never tasted, but they're beautiful. All of that richness of the plants and animal species provided this sustenance, and much of it was magnificently healthy. In fact, you know, much of it is referred to as superfoods, which maybe Heidi will speak about later. This high level of functionality meant that people were holistically so well in a well-being context. And look, at the end of it, the last one there was, you know, through that richness in the way that we lived and how we lived, our economy, the Noongar economy, was a magnificent model of sustainability. So there has never been anything introduced or brought here that challenges the sustainability of that economic system or model. Nothing that non-Aboriginal people, that white fellas have brought here, is sustainable. Not one thing. Right? So the issue, and again, so we jump into a contemporary and a reality of where we are now. There's so much strength and understanding that is needed to actually reintroduce this thinking. Because do we need farmers, for example, where 10,000 hectares or 40,000 hectares, which is very real out in the eastern wheat belt, 40,000 hectares is managed, controlled and owned by a family of 3, 4, 5 or 6 people. When once upon a time that sort of, and I'm talking in the last 100 years, that sort of land mass sustained and supported literally hundreds of individuals. Right. The farming and agricultural community, when I grew up in Northern in the 60s and 70s, was a thriving community and bustling, you know, townships. When you're Beverley and York and McGUIRE and Telebarron and a lot of these really small towns in between, they were smaller than those places. A lot of those places are gone, or they're on the brink. There's a lot of potential ghost towns in the wheat belt and throughout in the regions of not only the wheat belt, but in, I think right across Australia. So country needs people, right? Even Newmont, country needs people on it. The land must be managed. The land must be cared for. And so thriving communities are critical to healing country. We can't hand the responsibility to a chief scientist or a wealthy farmer, you know, or a bureaucrat, you know. And it's not just about engineering, it's not just about agribusiness, it's not just about politics and politicians thinking, right? Nature and people must be reconnected, because everyone's souls that I see, particularly in places where people don't spend time in nature, their souls are diminished as human beings. And so well-being and health are really important in how we think about climate change. You know, the analogy, or in the context of chess, you know, what moves are we making? Do we understand the strategy that is being played against us in terms of who is our opposition and our opponents? And how do we win? How do we play a game to win? Because we all want to win, especially in this country. We are so used to winning in every aspect of life. As a sports person, I absolutely know that. You're trained to win only, but you don't always win. So we've got to get in the game. We've got to play the game. We've got to understand the rules. We've got to understand our opponents, all right, or those that oppose the way that we think would be. This issue of survival this came out of the Southwest Settlement, and Justice Wilcox was the presiding QC, or what do they call it? No?
Judge.
Sorry?
Judge.
The judge. Simple word. Being too technical. But the presiding head of that case, the Noongar Nation versus the state, Wilcox determined, and so the state, I don't know if people know this, but the Southwest Settlement, which is that area that I spoke about in the country, was under threat from the state, right, of diminishing and excluding Noongar people out of the way, so to speak. And so the case that the state had, the basis of that case, was that the Noongar people here today could not be and were not the same people, right, that were here in 1829. And the case, the state, the basis of that case was that we couldn't be the same people because of what they had done to us, the history that had been played out, and the damage that had been done to our culture, our language, our families, and our clans, and our country, our land. So there was this real desire from the state to finally eradicate, Noongar people from the Southwest particularly, because as we know, most of the people in Western Australia live in Noongar country, or want to live in Noongar country. So getting us out of the way through native title and all these, these political processes and legal and commercial processes was what the battle for us was in that Southwest Settlement. So Wilcox actually made in his final, my final statement, he said these are the things that and of course his decision was in favour of us. So he said that Noongar people have survived for 190 years of this stuff by simply in the green holding on to what we had. That was a statement made by my old uncle, PICTON-WARLOW. That we and the old fellas reinforced that, the elders held on to, because people knew, my mum and through her mum and so on, we knew the stories of our old people. We knew the struggle that people went through. And we knew that this is absolutely factual. That Noongars, when they were excluded from the town and living on the town reserve, 3 k's out of the centre of the town, only had themselves. And so holding on to what we could, our traditions, our principles, our language, and each other, what actually helped Noongar people in this part of Australia and the world survive. So this was absolutely a statement of survival. This is another challenge in the chess context. We as Aboriginal people, Indigenous peoples globally. So the interesting thing is that UNDRIP, as it is, United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, has not been supported essentially by the Australian government. And the Australian governments do this with the McGUIRE Protocol. They do this with other protocols and declarations around nature, particularly, and human rights. So Australia is not a great performer at a United Nations level in a lot of the things that impact nature and ourselves as First Nations people. And so this truth-telling that I see, governments of non-Aboriginal people, particularly powerful non-Aboriginal people, struggle with, is about the actual process and the fact that if we tell the truth about this stuff and that previous stuff, and we tell the truth about the history, and we start to tell the truth about who are the traditional owners, who are the custodians, who are the people that have suffered and benefited even through the process of colonisation, we start to get, I think, some clarity about who we are as a nation. Because there's some questions that I can most definitely ask you, Moort, that we can ask, that you will not be able to answer. Because we're still here, right? So the Southwest Settlement, the battle of the states, both of the Liberal and the Labor governments, because we fought them on both sides, because they delayed it for so long. So the Southwest Settlement started in 2000. Well, it started well before that. But the single Noongar claim was passed in 2004, and then it was finally approved in 2019 or 20? Was it 20? Yeah, where it got passed, and then it was ready to roll out. Now that was 2020, so we've lost 2 years since the state and the Noongar nation agreed. This is what this is this resolution that we've met around the single Nyoongar claim in the southwest settlement. So Nyoongar people have been waiting for 20 years. Right? And as I said, we buried my mum, who was a matriarch and a very senior person in the Ballabong community. And in those 20 years, or the 20 years from the settlement to now, I believe we've lost 1,000 of our sacred knowledge holders, 1,000 of our matriarchs and patriarchs, and senior cultural people. What does that do for a nation? So this knowledge that I'm talking about is suddenly disappearing because we are not living that traditional lifestyle. We are not practicing ceremony. We're fighting for that. But our cultural survival is an ongoing battle. And in the game of chess context, there is always something. And I said to Tom, I'm not a chess player, but it's like, I'll use footy because I think it's the same analogy. It's like having a 19th person. In the game of footy, there's 18 players in each team. You know, you throw an extra player who comes in fresh at a pivotal moment, you lose. You are an Aboriginal people in the fight for land rights or native title, in the fight for justice, in the fight for recognition. We are always one man down. And so the chess game is played with two sets of rules. Right? The fight for justice, the fight for country, and so sacred knowledge about this magnificent thing that says, you know, and I always prompt people to remind them. That's one thing to acknowledge that you know, we've been here, our people have been here for 65,000 years. But what does that mean? What does that mean when we can read this sort of stuff? We hear politicians and leaders and people speak about their commitment to reconciliation or to the environment, and yet Noongar people and Aboriginal people, Indigenous peoples globally, are still at a level of equality and equity that is far below what is acceptable, that we should be accepting. Because this is a UN declaration. This is not an Australian or a Western. This is a United Nations declaration that this country continues to ignore, essentially. So power is a critical issue in the fight for the environment, in the fight for human rights. And Indigenous people, Noongar people, we hold knowledge that many others don't. But that knowledge is completely disrespected and completely undervalued. And so, what do we do about that? Is the challenge. If you've got any questions, please just chuck it in. So, the Southwest Settlement, I mentioned, the Noongar Land Enterprise Group, which Heidi is a senior project person for. I'm on the board for the NLE. The Noongar Chamber, I am also a board member on that. We started these two entities within 12 months of each other, so they're really important in my work and the things that I'm involved in. Now the Noongar Kura Past, Present and Future Recognition Act is an interesting little piece. Al, have you heard of this?
Yeah.
Yep. Alan's a senior lawyer, by the way. This Recognition Act, again, it was passed in 2016. It's an act for the recognition of Noongar people as the traditional owners of the lands, and it's about recognising our rights as this to be a part of this economy of Western Australia. So, people like Heidi and myself get very frustrated when we have meetings and discussions about strategies and economic development issues or community development, issues. So whilst it's an act of Parliament, it's not enacted. We are still fighting for this recognition that they say we've got. Absolutely. So just because we get a recognition or an acknowledgement to country at every public meeting, we are not participating, let me tell you, we are not participating at a high level in the economy of this very wealthy state. We are not participating. So we don't participate, because we're not participating in the economy, we are also not participating in the solutions for climate change or for the issues that are happening around desertification out in the eastern wheat belt, or for the Swan River, or for Rottnest Island, or for Kings Park, right? Because they've all got their structures. Whether it's local government, whether it's, you know, the political parties themselves, or whether it's the layers of bureaucracy, and then industry, of course, as well. So there's all these dynamics of a structure that work very well with each other, at least in sync. Maybe they don't agree with each other, but they oppose. They are the 19th man. They are the extra pawn that sits on the sidelines and, like with footy, are just brought on, right, to outplay us. And I think there was a story of a guy throwing the piece of art from that young Aboriginal lad in the gallery that you would have seen, where he's picking up the computer because he was playing. You know, that bit of art was magnificent, right? And now people get frustrated. So a lot of change is happening in the last 200 years because our people have been protesters and have been recognised as activists. So there's been more achievements actually achieved through activism than good political or legal negotiating. Because, you know, this very raw truth-telling happens in activism. And here's evidence, I think, of what has happened, you know, in the 200 years, because this stuff goes right back to, you know, BC. Right? So what we're saying here is that, you know, the economy particularly in the Western world, but the economy of the world has increased and improved 64-fold, right, in the last 200 years, roughly, right, which very nicely matches up with the 200 years of colonisation of Australia. So this country was formed at a very pivotal moment in the world history, world economics at the time. It was formed at the right time and it grew exponentially in the 200 years. And when you look at Aboriginal history, when you look at the history of our old people, and I've got very, very knowledge, I know very well what my dad's struggle and my mum's struggles were. But we were excluded from the economy. So we've got procurement policies that admit that we were excluded. So procurement policy is about engagement and participation of Aboriginal businesses, right? Procuring Aboriginal services from Aboriginal businesses. That policy still is not efficient in how it's working. The Noongar Chamber has got some real clear evidence on that. The NLE is gathering really clear evidence on the struggle of Noongar people to develop agribusiness, to manage land better, to bring back cultural perspectives and cultural ways of caring for country through agribusiness or through land enterprises. So you would think that with a Recognition Act, with a procurement policy, a Native Title Act policy, and a whole lot of reconciliation and Aboriginal friendly policies and strategies, that the Nyoongar community, the Aboriginal community, economically would be flourishing. But it's not. So we are still excluded in a lot of ways. It's improving because, like with footy, Aboriginal people were too good to leave out. And Aboriginal people, Noongar people, were invited into town football teams in the 70s. Maybe one or two in the 60s and the 50s. But in terms of the whole community, the town, you know, the towns where we grew up, certainly where I grew up, my dad was a captain coach and a real key organiser of Noongar carnivals and Noongar football teams and matches. Because the Noongars could not play, they weren't accepted in the towns of Brookton, Beverley and York and so on. Right? And that was well and truly into the 60s. We know the 67 referendum, what that's about. You know, when I was born, 63, I was 4. So for the first 4 years of my life, legally, I was a ward of the state. Absolute fact, right? Because, so these things about economy, these things about economic development, all add up to what is happening with the environment. There is a very strong correlation between the poverty and the disadvantage and the disconnect of First Nations peoples globally to economic power and environmental power, if you like, or the power to influence country and what happens. So we have the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation, we have this settlement thing, we have native title. These are all constructs of white fellas. These are not, they don't come out of our cultural context and our cultural ways that was so efficient for 65,000 years. We suddenly are introduced, we have to deal with and take the benefits that are derived through an introduced way of doing things. And it's a serious problem for us, Mike. This is the Indigenous estate. So those colours represent how much land is actually in the hands of Aboriginal people. So we are effectively, as a collective, the biggest landholder still in Australia. But do we actually control it is the question. How much power and authority do we have on it? Right? Because every piece of that land, and there's a whole lot of stuff in the white areas, because this doesn't include freehold type, or freehold, the land that individuals and groups have bought in a freehold sense. But every piece of this land has caveats attached to it. Right? So people can't use it. Our farms, the members of the NLE know this 100%. I know this with our property. We don't own it. It's freehold title, but we don't, and we have a title on it, a leasehold at the moment. But when it's divested, it still holds a caveat that says you can't go to the bank and use it as security or as collateral. So the economy is still excluded, right, from us, or we are still excluded from that freehold land base. I mean, everyone that owns land knows that it's your biggest asset. Right? That's a massive asset. Give Aboriginal people complete freehold title of this and allow us to do the deals with the mining companies, the pastoralists, the real estate peoples, the state government and the local governments, and whoever else that wants to do business, and let us derive the benefits from it in an absolute commercial and economic way. And we, as Aboriginal people and Indigenous peoples, as First Nations peoples, traditional owners and custodians, we will create our own solutions. You can guarantee it. And we won't need one of those. We won't need governments. But you see, that's the challenge, that's the problem. That's the dilemma, particularly for government. The government don't want to give this up. Because there could be some real serious mining opportunities in some of these places here where no one really wants to live. But it's still Aboriginal land, right? But the minute that mining interests come in, it becomes a state issue. And if a mine wants to come in and mine, and they find something, they have an absolute right to pursue that. Right? They've still got to negotiate, and obviously native title says you've got to sit down with the TOs. But TOs are not empowered. Right? Native title and mining, hand in hand, have destroyed the 21 language groups that exist in the Pilbara. Right? The divide and conquer principle that was brought here with the colonising imperatives still prevails. And it's created this massive tension. So you go to the Pilbara now, people are at war with each other. Families and clan groups that once lived in harmony are now native title holders that you can't come here because you're not part of our type mentality. Right? And it's war. So the Indigenous state has been smashed. I'm going to move on from that, but business stuff is really important. Enterprise development is really important. Having businesses, having people self-employed, and allowing people to be, freewheeling, if you like, in the way they do business is really important. Heidi, did you want to speak a little bit about the NLE? Let me know if you want to. Heidi's been struggling a little bit with the health, so I'm carrying the load a little bit for her today. But the NLE, yes or no, did you say?
No, you go ahead with this governance thing, yeah.
So the NLE, and these are the members of the NLE, or it's actually changed a bit, we've had a couple of groups drop off, but essentially what the NLE does is we believe that there's two parts of the way we should be operating, and one is that we should always be, the fundamental principle of our business and business ways is that we are culturally appropriate in our thinking and planning and designing. So whatever we do, it must be culturally appropriate, right, in the context of Boodjar, Moort and Kaartdijin, our knowledge, our families and our country. Right? What is good for country, what is good for the family, and what is good for that sacred knowledge that we must protect. So IP, exploiting or utilising, the benefits from wattle seed, for example, or the fish, or the animals, or the plants, is an important industry that's starting to brew. The bush produce industry is massive. It's got massive appeal, and the NLE is doing a lot of work around it. And so what we know is that to work through these complex processes of commercialising, sacred knowledge, or commercialising, native products from the bush or from country is a really challenging process for an individual or even a family. So having a Noongar Land Enterprise Group is really important. We're effectively a cooperative of landholder partners that come in, and then we operate through a process of planning, and obviously doing all the things in a corporate sense that you would do. Set your strategic plan, have your board, provide direction for that strategic planning and direction, and then have your executive deliver on that and your workers. And it's worked really well. In fact, I think the NLE, to me, and obviously I'm biased, but the work that we've been doing over the last 10 or so years is now very slowly coming to fruition. And I'll invite Heidi to speak a little bit about that. So last year, in 2020, we bought the WA Tree Farms Nursery just out of Northern, and we changed its name to the Budgar, which is the place of many trees, native tree nursery. When we took it over, the previous owner was producing about 400,000 seedlings, native seedlings, and in the space of about 4 months, we had delivered to the planting season that came in 2021, 650,000 species, 650,000 seedlings, and this year we put out 750,000. So our vision and plan is to turn this into a 3 million seedling operation, and then to also purchase other nurseries. The important thing in obviously the nursery industry, or the revegetation and rehabilitation industry, is that quality seeds, native seeds, is critically endangered. So at the moment, the quality of our seed that exists in remnant bush or even in Kings Park, right, the quality of that seed is very, very, well, it's threatened, let's put it that way. And so when you go to the wheat belt, where so many ecological systems have been destroyed and species have been destroyed, a lot of those species only, the seed for plants, these plants, and even some of the animals, right? Because you don't just, in a crop, you don't just get rid of the trees, you get rid of everything, from the soil and even the biota in the soil. You change that whole system. And so the problem is, in terms of rehabilitating and wanting to plant, millions of trees for carbon offsets, or for the restoration industry, or for biofuels and anything else that people want to do, is that the quality of our seed is under serious threat. So, what does that mean? Last year in the wheat belt alone, just on what I just said, there was a demand, there was a requirement for, or a demand, a market for 18 million seedlings. The whole, collectively, The industry only provided 9. So, and that's without big companies like Woodside and Impex now, particularly. Impex are wanting to plant out 400,000 hectares. So when you work with 1,500 to 2,000 plants, seedlings per hectare, this suddenly comes up to 600 million seedlings that they will need over the next 10 years. Just with that one project, we are way, way short. So the restoration of the land, if you like, in the wheat belt will not happen unless groups, and not just Nyoongar and Aboriginal people, but this industry is supported through very healthy and functional and well-operated enterprises like native nurseries. So seed collection is a massive problem. The endemic species and the quality of the seed, and then of course the whole processing of, that's involved there. Because collecting seed is not just a go and collect it and put it in put it in the room and let it sit for a while and then we'll go out and chuck it in the ground. Although our native species are really, really robust and strong and resilient, like I said, they're seriously under threat. So we need to be investing a lot into this issue of restoration. This is just a diagram of the Boodjar, Moort and Kaartdijin. And for us as Noongar people, we are place-based people, so our identity comes from pretty much the land we live on and the identity of not only the people and not only the place, but also all of these things, these species of animals, right? Because and birds and insects and the waterways and the rocks are all part of our total system, right? So the holistic nature of nature itself is embedded in this concept, this trilogy of being. Right? And I must acknowledge Lenny Collard, Professor Lenny Collard, who designed, I keep saying to him, you designed the model, but you don't own the knowledge. It belongs to Nyoongar people with Nyoongar knowledge. And in our world, you don't own knowledge. Right? We can't acknowledge a professor or an academic who designs a model that takes advantage or captures and explains quite well what our Kaartdijin is. So Kaartdijin is the knowledge system. It's the way that we not only pass on, but how we hold to, practice and preserve that knowledge and the knowledge systems. So Kaartdijin is important. Cultural authority comes from knowledge, right? And the knowledge is held by the clan groups, the families, the elders, the men and the women separately. Right? The way the Moort, so our kinship laws are the blueprints for culture itself. Right? And our families are smashed right at the moment. There is enormous lateral violence, there is enormous family feuding, there is enormous divisions, right? Because of what the system has done to our family groups over 200 years. So, like the native seeds, right, Nyoongar and Aboriginal families are seriously threatened, seriously dysfunctional, right? And that's a serious problem for us, but I think it's a serious problem for everybody. And the issue of Boodjar is the concept of not just the land, but as you've heard me speaking, it's everything in that system of country. Yeah. It's the ecosystems, it's the weather patterns, it's the elements itself, and then it's every other species, right? The topography, the geography, and the biodiversity are all part of Moort. And identity and knowledge about, this animal or this waterway, or that rock, or that hill, that tree, are all part of this collective system of Boodjar, Moort and Kaartdijin. And we organise, so I've got some, contemporary context or systems here, so place, identity and spirit, discovery and reconnection happens on country, but it doesn't happen without family connections or knowledge, right? So to the ego, the individual's development about their place-based identity sits in the middle and that overlap where everything comes together. So young people cannot learn about country, they can't learn about themselves, they can't learn about their totems without appropriate family knowledge holders on country and with the knowledge intact. Right? And this is not happening. This is the structure of the system where we, going back to the chess game, we are losing this. This is being destroyed on a daily basis. And for many families and clan groups, it's already gone. So the Boodjar Moort Kaartdijin philosophy, also we use this in the NLE, I use this in my own business models and my experiences, where we talk about all of these elements, you know, in terms of just integrity about what we're doing, right? Around some standards that we might set or some processes that we might work to. Right? So a good provenance story, if we're developing wattle seed, you know, we've developed a honey brand, Noongar, which we know, you know, will go gangbusters globally, but we've got to build the scale. So for us, as a reputable brand, as Noongar honey, developed by Noongar people for Noongar people, we've got to build the capability and the capacity to take that to a scale so that when China says, well, we don't just want, you know, 300 jars, we want 300 tonnes of your honey, and we're nowhere near that capacity. So we're in a process of building that in a commercial way, but we're trying to do it in a very strong culturally strong and ethical way. I'm going to talk a little bit about fire. Budgar, this is sacred knowledge. Fire is sacred, knowledge is sacred, and country is sacred. These are the song lines. So anyone that's driven these roads know that this is also a very strong representation of the highways and the main road system. But quite clearly they follow the song lines of Noongar people. And so when you think about when people arrived here and they started to grow the colony and move out further from Perth and York and Albany, that they took these black trackers, everyone knows that they were black trackers. So the black trackers were people, and particularly men, predominantly men, who knew the songs and knew country through the songs and the song lines. So they took these white blokes out, following there, and these guys mapped it. Right? So that correlation between the main road system and the song lines is very clear. Right? That's a contribution doesn't get valued or recognised by main roads. Have recently done some work with this, I know that. So they're giving it some recognition, but I haven't seen it manifest in contracts or in, you know, some real tangible way that it is a benefit to the Noongar people, because this is still our knowledge. That's just the recognition I offer, but that's another. So in the same Boodjar Moort Kaartdijin, I use this for Kaartdijin, which is knowing, belonging and spirit. So I do a lot of work with you know, Heidi and I have done some great work with young fellas in terms of reconnection to spirit, reconnection to identity, reconnection to country, reconnection to cultural practices, and we use this model. So spirit, you know, the spirituality and the spiritual connection or reconnection must happen on country. So that's why we've got up here. Belonging happens within family kinship understandings. So knowing who your mob are and knowing how to behave inside that kinship structure is a critical part of having a strong sense of belonging. Because that's really important for everyone. And then the knowledge system is about knowing this stuff. I want to flip through these because I'm going to hand over to Heidi in a sec. Oh, look at that one's come up again. This is another complex, I'm not going to spend too much time, but this is an identity chart using the old, what do they call those circles?
Venn diagram.
Venn diagram, thank you. So the Venn diagram, you know, is a basic thing, but what it does is identifies through this particular circles all the things that connect, and so understanding, and it's all in Noongar, so I don't want to go through everything, but on the outside are the 6 seasons, And so nature is represented, and the cycle of nature is represented by the 6 seasons. Inside those 6 seasons are these processes of life giving, and obviously the way that life itself, not only for the humans, but for the whole of nature, operates and functions in a natural world. At the centre is this, this mother and father, or this man and woman spirit of war, and some Nyoongar speak about the man spirit, that the sea has got a man spirit. In this case, we talk about the sky having a man spirit, right? So men's ceremonies, ngank is always Boodjar. Ngank is the kinship term for mother, but it's also the word for son. Yeah. And there's a lot of the codes of our language revealed when you learn culture, when you learn language, and you start to decode the language itself with a level of knowledge, understanding. You can create this understanding of the codes that our old people put into the language itself. So as an example, ngank is the kinship term for the son, for mother, but it's also the word for son. Nganka, son, and the life-giving force of women is evident in this example, because the word for river is Birlia. And we see that in Birlia, Birlia, the suburb, in the area down south there. But Birlia is both the umbilical cord and the word for river, right? And that wetland or river system. And we know that river systems are very rich in sustenance or food and natural sustenance. There's a whole bunch of Noongar mob that come out to our place regularly as men, and we have a lot of conversations. I'm organising one for the next couple of weeks. But a lot of our senior Noongar men are present in this photo who come out, and we discuss a lot of this stuff that I talk about. So it's reinforced by senior men, it's reinforced by knowledge holders, and it's reinforced by them teaching me and us participating in stuff that we love to discuss and that we love per se. These are some little diagrams that we did as part of the Dandy Pulling. Only Liz, who's my sister actually, so Liz Heidi, made some comments about how fire and cleansing happens. How fire heals the land. It's not a hazard that must be managed all the time. It's obviously a dangerous part of nature, and if unmanaged, it becomes very dangerous. But it's very sacred too. So if we use fire in a knowledgeable way, we can actually heal the land. The fire, and we can avert the risk of wildfires by using it. Guaranteed. But we don't use it. So DFES does not give authority to and recognition to sacred knowledge around fire and cultural burning in this state. Many of the other fire and emergency services have done that across Australia. So this guy here is Vic Stephenson. He's a real knowledgeable fire bloke. I went up to North Queensland to his country and participated in workshops, and they were brilliant. These are, Heidi and I ran that cadetship for these young blokes. The interesting thing about, and this is out on our property, we ran that program. We started with 12, we finished the cadetship with 8, and all the way through it, the hierarchy in DFES, who were, a lot of them were mates of mine because I'd spent 18 years in that job. None of them really believed that we'd get any. They all thought, yes, let's put these young blokes through, let's help them get a job somewhere, and if they go into ranger work or the SES or the volunteers, that would be a great outcome. What they didn't count on was that 4 of the 8 became professional firefighters. They graduated the cadetship program and then went straight into the schools training professional firefighter. So out of this program, the amazing thing, and Heidi was the architect behind it because he was working in DFES at the time. The amazing thing is it won the Premier's Award because we delivered such outstanding results. And then the funding was cut. So it's never been run again. That was 2015. This is the 19th man just coming in every time. Start something good, take them out. Too good, right? So my sense is we as Aboriginal people and Indigenous knowledge holders, we are perceived maybe inadvertently or unconsciously as a threat to the structure and the system, right? Particularly that system of power, right? Because it's always politics and it's always the powerful elements of our society, whether it's the pastoral industry, whether it's the agricultural industry, whether it's the mining industry, whether it's the legal industry or the social services industry. Many of our pursuits and aspirations for ourselves are blocked regularly, and we've had lots of stories of potential enormous successes. Hello. Potential successes are and that's evident in the Southwest settlement. So, we've been waiting. We thought we won that court case in 2004, and we did. And here we are in 2022, still probably, Heidi, 18 months away from seeing the regional corporation set up and unleashing the things that we as Noongar really want to do. So we will have waited close to 22 years for our Southwest settlement, which was $1.3 billion. And I can tell you that $1.3 billion is $1.3 billion, let's face it. But it had a greater value in 2004 than it does today. So the $1.3 billion with the Southwest settlement, I would estimate is probably, really worth in real terms no more than $600,000 effectively. Because by the time the cost of setting up 6 regional corporations, which are allocated through this funding, they are literally startups, right? So they'll take 3-4 years to even get to a point of viability and any level of success. My personal forecast is that we will end up with 2 surviving and 4 failing. And that's going to be a tragedy for the Noongar nation. But the Noongar nation will not achieve, in my view. Will not achieve our goals. Not because we can't, but because of that 19th man. Right? There's an extra player in the game and we don't see them. They're unheard and they're unseen, but they're there. And it happened with that connection. Right? We created all the success, the young people participated, and they succeeded in their own pursuits. And then it was stopped. And that's been going on forever in our stuff. These are my girls, my 3 daughters. And the idea is that they're standing in the middle of the cultural burning. So fire, when done properly, is not dangerous at all. And I said, and the girls, when they're there in their designer clothes, fashion queens.
To get that from there.
I said, come over here, lot, come on. And look, they were just walking around, we were burning, really, and it's great. Like the girls, and my son, and my brothers and sisters and their kids as well. This stuff is so enriching in your life, right? And it'll be wonderful for every person, not just Noongar people. This stuff is you're participating in that spirit of the land stuff. Smoke and fire is a spiritual thing. We've all sat around the campfire looking into the flames, and thinking about life as it is. So the power of fire is really, really important for country, but also for humans. So if you get a chance to do cultural learning, or if you get a chance to support cultural learning, please do. Our country needs it. I'm going to flick through some of this stuff. This was a statement that I made globally. Now it's being used. And these are all little critters that have actually jumped back out of the ground on our farm. The wheat sheep farm in places that were pretty bereft of life, and most definitely bereft of biodiversity. Because the sheep, every time these little fellas, these are donkey orchids actually. These, we've got a whole swathe of them that jump out of the ground now. This has taken 15 years, and that's simply because we've removed sheep from these paddocks, from these areas. You know, the bird life, you know, these little blokes here, and the amazing thing is the echidnas, the first echidna that was seen by my mum, who had the worst eyesight that all of us in the car, but she spotted it for and that was a spiritual, you know, thing really that happened. We've got this very, very significant community of echidnas now on our property, and we think potentially, possibly, woolies. We've found some scats that we think one of the experts said, yeah, they're almost definitely woolies. So, you know, those little critters have not been in Beverley, or certainly on that farm that we've got for, I don't know, 100 years. Native grasses and all of these wildflowers, you know, are also starting to reappear. That's about the ECA's fire, and this was the disastrous fires. I'm going to move on from that too, because that's it. But culture, Kaartdijin is our spirit fire. This is the cultural burning stuff. We believe, you know, it heals country because it has a very spiritual and very specific power. Right? And understanding how to apply it to country is really, really important. And we don't see it. Right? It doesn't happen here in Perth, in the metropolitan area. There is no cultural burning that happens in Kings Park, up in the Darling Scarp, or any nature reserve around the place. Because DFARS and local governments and, you know, municipalities all have pretty much determined that fire is dangerous and it needs to be, you know, managed. So we end up with the models of prescribed burning, you know, and hazard control burning that is very dangerous for the biodiversity because it's not this sort of stuff. Yeah, that's burning that we've been doing on our place. This is so wrong way fire. So this is just I pulled over one day driving on the Brookton Highway, and these are fires that I know happen through dropping of incendiary devices from an aeroplane or a helicopter. And they drop it, and just goes whoosh. And as you can see, it just destroys everything on the ground. This stuff is pretty, if you've driven down Brookton Highway, you know it's pretty thick bush through there. So prescribed burning or hazard control burning, and you can see the flames, how hot it got by the height. This is a big tree, right? You know, there's probably 15 metres up there. So those flames were, you know, so everything below it here is just completely destroyed. Right? So if you think about the insects, the biota, you know, the small animals, the small reptiles, nothing would survive these hot fires. This is an example of the cultural burning that we did up at North Queensland, because I can't show you here other than the stuff we did on our place. But the comparison is. Anyone seen this photo before? This image? Do you know where it is? So that's the Stirling Ranges. And so the Nyoongar people down there are known as Bibberman. And they say that we're all Bibberman, we're not Nyoongar, because Nyoongar actually means man. So there's been this, you know, this debate going on that we're not Nyoongar, we're Bibberman. But Bibberman, Bib is, right, the female breast. So if you can see the outline, that's the Bluff Knoll here, I think, that's Bluff Knoll. Right, so that angle, so this was, I was actually down there with the Ranger program, and this was in 2018 or 19, where was the fire? The Stirling Range fire, big wildfire went through it, destroyed it, Stirling Range. And I pulled over and I thought, geez, look at that, I could see it through the trees. That, you know, Mother Nature, Mother Earth is on her back. Right? So the Bibberman people connect to this because of this grieving story and this image that is in nature. And we see this stuff all the time. And when you put into that context of, you know, the wildfire that went through there and just destroyed this magnificent ecology that's around the Stirling Ranges. I think this stuff is, this ecosystem and this land, this country, has transformed. It's been transformed negatively from this. The hot fires that went through there, you know, it's going to take 100 years to fully recover from that. And it's a time, really, you know, in my view, as both a fiery and a Nyoongar, this is the moment, right here, at that point in time, was a time for the authorities to come in and start managing the recovery of this land. Because again, if you drive down the South West Highway, just out of Budgar and the Yaraguia fire that we all know about, right? The revegetation, the rehabilitation that's happening, or the regeneration that's happening there naturally, is really unhealthy. Because you've got this, you know, this massive number of trees that are just shot out of the ground, right? And they need to be thinned, to be honest. So the cultural burning keeps, you know, seed germination down in an appropriate way. So when country recovers without any management, you know, this seed that's in here is cleared to germinate. So there will be 3 times, maybe 10 times more trees regenerating in this area. Right? And that's not good when you consider the drying climate. So fire recovery, or recovery of land after hot fires, wildfires, is a really important activity that should be happening, and it's not. No one's doing it. So people just, you know, defence go, oh, we're not going to burn, so we don't have to worry about it. DVCA, it helps them because it hits their targets, which is what that map was that I had back a bit further. I'm going to flip through some of this stuff. We're colonising our minds. So that's an example there of, you know, the grass trees do pretty well. They're magnificent little critters, but everything else really struggles. Okay. Nyoongar Boodjar is sick, is what that's saying. So I'll just show you that one. So this is a little video. So if you've never seen a cool burn, so I'm just going to show you a little bit now about our property, and this is the work that, you know, is all my passion at the moment. I'm heading towards retirement, and for me, you know, this sort of stuff that's happening, just freely, if you like, because we've removed sheep, so there's a bit of wild oats in there, but this is native grass. You know, all of these colonising species are coming back into areas where they've not grown for some of them 100 years. These are all native species. That's what this place looked like and this is our farm in 2008. You can see we're just about to plant, so it's obviously that time of the year with the rain and the little bit greenery. Tom, we stood here and looked at that hill. That's what it looked like in 2008. That's what it looks like in 2021. So yeah, from that, and that was pretty marginal country, you know, just grazing. There was no cropping that went on there. But it's beautiful, you know, it's beautiful. The hills and the little valleys are magnificent actually. And they certainly are now. When you go from that to that, from that to that, yeah. So, and it's got better, those trees have started to flourish a bit more. Aboriginal knowledge, deep learning, that's what this little diagram is talking about. Just walk with us, is what we say. The Noongar Ranger programs are happening around the place. They're not secured, so there's lots of people, young people and old people, elders and community people who are putting their hands up to say, we want to be a part of this, but it's almost a 2-year cycle of funding. So like the cadet program, really good stuff starts and then is not funded. And people are not supported through that issue of the land itself, where capital and private ownership and the ability to finance your own businesses or your own enterprises, we're still not there as Noongar people. We're still potentially, particularly at this sort of scale, we're still potentially 10 or 20 years away from it. And there's a lot of very successful business people, and there's a growing middle class in the Noongar community. But to take on these types of bigger enterprises means a lot more time and energy and effort and leadership. So we're getting there. So that's 2008 on the same property. That was in 2015. And so you stand here now and these trees are actually cut set, so this is the best time for you. But we've planted 600,000 trees now, and that's about halfway. So we've probably got another 400,000 or 500,000 trees that we want to plant in the next few years. And I'm doing some deals with people now to secure that. So I asked, is it possible to recreate the greatest estate on earth? With old Bill Gamage's book that he wrote about. And in my view, yes we can, because this was just pretty barren country. Plant some trees, give it a rest, let it rest, and then, over time, you could bring animals back in, in an appropriately well managed way. We could grow sheep here really well. And a lot of people say that we should be cattle, but I'd rather leave it to the kangaroos myself. All right, thank you. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you all, that was marvellous. Did we have any questions from the audience?
So it's a bit hard to ask one question.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was amazing. Really great. Yeah, and I'd just really like to show our appreciation again. Heidi, did you want to say anything, or you're?
I'll do a little bit to wrap up, but not as full as oral, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
You can leave that off and we can still look at you. Hi everyone. Sorry I didn't prepare a presentation this afternoon as planned because I've been really crook this week and I thought I wasn't going to be here, but I've got out of bed and I am here. Oral and I often get to talk together and we usually talk about the same stuff, maybe just in a different way, and I could sit and listen to him talk all day, and when we work together it doesn't feel like work, so this has been really lovely just sitting here. First time I've been out of bed for a couple of days, so it's been good. But Noongar Land Enterprise Group that Oral was part of founding back a couple of years ago, and he's a director of, is one of the places that I work today. And Oral talked a bit about the cultural governance and how it is in existence. And I think it's really important to go back and, well, a few things he talked about there actually is the way that we play to win and navigate all the systems to get outcomes, not for ourselves, but for the betterment of our people, really. And I think as Noongar people, we've done that over a lifetime. I don't think there's a job that I've had that hasn't been to ensure better treatment, justice, equity for myself, my family, as I've gotten older, my children, or our community. So I feel like we're always playing games with a strategy around how does this look better for us here. And I often talk about what motivates me, and today what motivates me is my 3 children. I've got 3 girls, much like Oral, who I don't want experiencing an upbringing or things that I had to experience as a young person. So a lot of what motivates me is about how do I make sure that they're proud young Aboriginal girls, they're not ashamed of who they are, they stand tall in their culture, in their spirit, in their connection to country. You know, when someone calls them names or says something about them, you know, I remember when I was younger, I used to get caught a coon or a boom, things I didn't even know what those words meant, by the way. Like, but I knew it was a bad thing, like that it wasn't a nice thing. And I've got 4 sisters, and we all probably experienced that. Over time, you know, that has an impact. And my girls, I think, this is my youngest here, she's 8. She's the, how do I describe her? The blackest white kid you'll ever see, or the whitest black kid you'll ever see. She's, you know, my fairest skinned kid, but she's a proper bush kid. We're looking at this Nyoongar season calendar, and we've been out watching Quandong recently, and then went away on holiday, got back, knew that Quandong was the right time to pick in certain areas, and so we've been out, particularly with this one. And it's funny because we're cruising out and we've been making jam and making other things with this Quandong. We've done a good little harvest there, but she says, when we're pulling them off the tree, Mum, these look like mini peaches. And you know, I never even knew that Quandongs were native peaches. I feel like, yeah, I didn't know. And then I see this, right? And the reason I'll tell you that story, and I look to country and to culture and to spirit always for science. And I believe it talks to us in ways that, you know, you can't really explain. So for my 8-year-old who's never been out to get Quandong before, to look at the Quandong, which really doesn't look like a mini peach at all, and say this looks like a mini peach, to me is the spirit of old people talking to her out on country. And so I just thought that was super special, and I'm taking it back out. Hopefully tomorrow we'll get some more mini peaches. But yeah, so my kids motivate me in this day, and I've spent a lot of time working to create opportunities for young people. I think our culture, as you can see from Oral's presentation, and survival has been at risk from lots and lots of forces. And during my time, I've seen how culture has been a strength, or something that's able to pull young people out of darkness. So I have, you know, done a lot of work before my kids come along, and then my oldest is about to turn 18, so in my girls' teenage years, to make sure that their education included two-way science or like Aboriginal knowledge in the school curriculum, and set up a cultural-based school academy. Very different, all the other academies that you know, Clontarf, Deadly Sister Girls, we're a foundation. What did I miss? Polly Farmer. All of those, well, most of those are sports-based. You know, they know that we're good at sport. Everyone knows that we're good at sport, but sport isn't our strength. Our strength is our culture and our connection and our community. So I set up a cultural-based academy where we had our culture, our knowledge, our history connected into the school curriculum, and it's never been done before in this state. I would say probably in this country. And I did that all free of funding, just for love, at a school of which I kind of had been part of. My school was knocked down, and this new school was this part of my old school legacy, so I felt like it's something I owed to our community as well. But I want to give an example about when we started this academy. We had about around 20 young girls who were all involved with the mental health services, as in being managed quite intensively by mental health services for suicide, self-harm, depression, anxiety. And by the way, I have no clinical background or anything like this here. But through our program, we managed to bring down that number to about 5. And that was purely based on the power of, like, a kid. We had one student in a room who the teachers were just looking to suspend all the time. This is a boy in this instance. And no teacher wanted to work with him. They were just constantly putting on himself and on his own. And I walked into the classroom one day where he's sitting, looking at this boy. And then what this kid's name is, and he's a Humphreys. My kids are Humphreys. I thought, all right, let me go and ask him, well, who are your mom? And he couldn't really tell me who his parents were. Well, who's someone in your family? You know, he tells me his grandmother. I said, oh, well, I'm your nan. And he looked at me like this, and then I drew on the board his family tree. And for the first time ever, he felt connected to what is one of the biggest families there in Ballon Country. I hear about that boy. He's a little bit older now. He's about to turn 16. But I just think about how easy it is to write people off write Nyoongar kids off and write off all the people who are lost in the system and don't quite know how to fit. But all it takes is a relationship and connection, helping people to connect to who they are. And taking those kids, I brought down his great-grandmother, I brought down his grandmother. My kids are auntie for him, so he had his big aunties to growl him at the school, and it's amazing how easy it is to have control, or help a child to do the right thing when they're getting growled by their big auntie, who they probably think is a lot more serious than the principal. Let me tell you, it works. It works. So those kind of solutions are the solutions that I think we work for in any model, whether it be education. I've worked in child protection, I've worked in policing, DFES, fire and emergency services. Education, I think the exciting space is businesses like Noongar Land Enterprise, where we can define our own future and strategy and create our own business models. And I think they're really important because the example of the school, funding was already given to those other programs. So they came in the next year because it was already guaranteed. The DFES program, where we got Aboriginal firefighters, they got themselves through with a good program, just wasn't funded for other priorities. But businesses like Noongar Land Enterprise not only enable us to make some money doing things as our cultural right, for example on our bush foods, but it helps us to connect our mob back out on country again. So the difference I see, and I name it up, like, because I think you have to be honest about stuff. My mum was cruising along yesterday, said when we went to the doctor, she says, I want to go and get some of this relaxation tea. Do you know where this eugenics mob is? I said, I know where they are, but I'm not taking you there to get any tea for you. And she says, why? And you know, I thought I support Aboriginal business. This is not an Aboriginal business. They just got some pretty artwork on there, and they are not Aboriginal owned or led. And mum, if you want some tea, I'll get some for you. But people got to realise that Aboriginal people, bush foods belong to us, you know, and I think NLE, when I say belong to us, it's we've been living on it forever, and so now that it's become sexy as another business for other people, all of a sudden it's being exported outside of this country and used for all sorts of things. Aboriginal people across this country is less than 2% participation in the Australian bush foods industry. That's just participation. If you look at ownership, I think it's like 0.2% Aboriginal owned. So our honey, 100% Aboriginal owned. It's grown on our farms, on Nyoongar properties. We do the whole thing, training, pouring, the labelling, the design, the graphic design, everything's been done by us. The wattle seed is harvested, it's hand-picked. We experiment in our kitchen with recipes and share that with people. Well, I certainly do, and I tell people, can you taste the difference? Because this is made with love, much like the quandong jam that I've just been making. When you get to drive out a couple hours and grab some quandong and mix it up and make it, well, I just think it tastes better than what you can buy off a shelf somewhere, made somewhere else. But those experiences about helping this 8-year-old tell stories about what we use that quandong for, or everything else around, like the journey out, song, laughing, family that we meet along the way, all of that is what's important in that industry. And the Australian bush food industry now is about mass planting of sandalwood or mass planting of wattle seed in one great big paddock, getting out, stripping it with machinery, cleaning it up, and then getting high volume out for sale. And that's not what Noongar Land Enterprise is about. It's not what Oral's enterprise is out at his farm is about. Most of our Noongar people are looking for, how do we, you know, bring our families back out on country? How do we teach them? How do we preserve this knowledge? How do we protect parts of our knowledge? Like, what do we want to share? What don't we want to share? What do you want to share publicly? What do you want to keep hidden? Because we have the right to do that with our knowledge and our plants. One of the examples of where that went wrong recently is with gin. So I love gin, by the way, it's probably my drink of choice. Water first, gin second. There were some gins that have been made, you know, with all the botanicals now, and 2 down in Margaret River, one which was made with a very sacred tree of ours, a Boodjar tree, or you'll start to see it flower soon. Actually, in some parts you start to see it flower very soon, a little bit earlier than others, but it's that orangey red tree that tells us it's Christmas time, so it's the Christmas tree. And that particular tree was used, all the flowers of that tree, in a gin, which the moment I saw it physically felt sick, like deep inside, literally wanted to throw up. Oh my God, what are they doing? And I messaged them straight away to say, hey, can we have a yarn about this? You know, it's really important that we talk, and if we don't talk, I feel like other people are not going to be too happy, and you're not going to have a very good time from here on out. I was ignored. Also followed up with an email. Other people saw it, they all jumped on, people were blocked. But long story short for that is it did make the news nationally and internationally about the use of the Boodjar in this gin. And that particular company, by this point we'd identified 2 companies. The second company withdrew their products off the shelf, and the first company just said that they believed they did the right thing with the use of the flowers by guidance that they had, and that was it, and continued as they do. So there are things like this that are really concerning for us, and the McGUIRE protocols that Oral talked about earlier and NLE have been advocating. So under the UN rights of Indigenous people, the McGUIRE protocol really fits in there under our cultural IP. Is really important, and we are trying to lead this conversation across the nation now to say, all right, the bush food industry's there, you know, it's 50 million or whatever it is a year. We know all that. We're not trying to say we want it to stop, but what we're saying is there needs to be better systems in place to protect the cultural knowledge of our plants, that we need to be enabled to be driving that industry, not just participating but driving. For us on Noongar country, so everyone who goes and gets their bush food now, I can guarantee you, you're eating bush foods from over east, like lemon myrtle. Sorry to disappoint you, my grandmother, his grandmother, none of them picked that because it don't belong here. You're eating plants from someone else's country. We just don't have the commercialisation of our plants, which I think is great, because now we can control we can try to control what we want to release and how that's done. So I think for us in NLE, we're very passionate about advocating about the bush foods, but equally passionate about getting our own bush foods out in the market and letting people know then when you go for a walk just down the road here, what plants you can eat that come from this country. You know? Yeah. So we have a project that we just started, which is a bush food innovation hub, and that's based out in Avondale, nearby to where Oral is. And the idea of the hub is that we create a space with machinery and equipment and services that all of Noongar business can access. So if we use an example, like Oral's farm is around the corner, let's say he harvests some wattle seed and he might say to NLE, oh, you know, we've got a ton of this, do you want to buy it? This is one example. He might say, do you want to buy it, take it off my hands, we give him cash and do what we do with it. Or he might come in and say, I need to clean my wattle seed because I'm going to roast it and grind it up, package it and sell it myself. Can I come in and use the equipment? Then that's what it's there for. Someone else might come in, I've roasted and ground my wattle seed, but I need some help with packaging. So it's the whole supply chain that will be available for everybody to be able to come in. So we were right at the beginning of that phase. It's growing. And it will grow. It's growing fairly quickly, but we need a little bit more investment, financial investment now to get us to where we want to be in the next 5 years, certainly. So that hub is about helping all of Noongar, and you know how big Noongar country is because Oral showed those maps a few times. Help people and do an outreach model, even to get down to other people's farms and give advice and support, business support or consultancy, even advice on how they can tap into that market. So really we're kind of focusing on bush foods at the moment, but equally on seed collection for the nursery, but also getting ahead of the demand, which is a really unrealistic demand that we have just on carbon projects alone for planting. So great ideas in principle, but haven't thought about collecting all of the seed that is required for those projects. And like Oral said, the quality of seed is not too good, and if we keep ignoring burning and cultural land management practices, then we're going to continue to have poor quality seed and low seed supply for projects moving forward. So just a point of interest, I thought I'll tell you about our nursery. This week we have 3 plants, 3 of an acacia species growing in a fenced off area. Those 3 plants, there are only 2 plants in the wild found on all of Noongar country. So for us, it's not just about grabbing what people are wanting to grow in their properties, it's about protecting the biodiversity. It's about looking after those threatened species. And we've just done that because it's the right thing to do. And that's the kind of stuff that's really important to us too, is to make sure that the survival of all of those species continues. When we look at the wheat belt and all the reports on vegetation across the whole of wheat belt, and I've read all of them now, we have in most areas less than 40% of the native vegetation existing. In others, you're sitting at around 15, 20. So that's a pretty scary space to be in. And how Oral showed you the picture around the plants aren't just plants to us, you know, the plants are part of our being, they're part of our existence, they're part of our knowing, they're part of everything. So those plants, those animals, making sure that that country is strong and it's thriving and it's healthy means that we can be strong and be thriving and healthy. And those are the kind of things that we put our time and energy into now to ensure that survives and continues into the future. So I think it's important to support work and businesses like Noongar Land Enterprise and support Noongar business models, you know, and we're not just making them up, like we have a lot of experience in these things, and so you build things to make them work. And that's the kind of space we're in now. It's a little bit easier for us to do what we know is the right way to do things, because you don't necessarily get questioned as much, but you can also demonstrate some really good business practice and models at the same time. In government, it's often about trust, or people not trusting that our knowledge is right, or our systems are right, or our models are right. NLE is very clearly demonstrating that the business model and the Noongar business model is a good and strong model. And we've had a lot of success so far, and actually pretty excited for the success that we'll have in the next few years. Not just in the business, but also in the growth of our Noongar mob as we take them on this journey. So probably that's all I want to contribute around the work of NLE, and just the importance of not skimming projects for 100% efficiency and leaving out the cultural values. Like, I think we need to stand really, really, really firm and assert where, because we have to make money, like Oral said, culturally appropriate, commercially viable. So, you know, I spend a lot of time looking at how much money we spend on labour for wattle seed, all of that equipment cleaning, where the efficiencies can be made. But if we're sacrificing on that cultural strength and the well-being of our people, well, I make sure that a big chunk of that is left there. So as long as we're making a profit, but we're building and ensuring the sustainability of our people, that's what's important. And government doesn't look after us in that regard at all. Yeah. So we can maybe do some questions. Is that okay, Tom? Yeah?
To Oral, do you get much interest from farmers who are surrounding your property? Interested in putting, I mean, I imagine they benefit from having you there. Insects and whatever that come back.
Yeah.
And is there a plan to, I mean, Tom and I drove down to Brown Bay after they had sort of harvested everything. The place is flat, there's nothing, it's just rows and trees, and there's nothing anywhere. Plus the Stirling Ranges down to Brown Bay.
Yeah.
It's quite sad, really.
Yeah.
But is there any surrounding farms that actually you're interested in trying to do something similar or in a smaller scale?
No.
Really? I mean, so they see
really
as an enemy, or?
No, I don't have a lot of interaction with farms other than a couple of young blokes who, and their Murrays as well, who lease some of our properties. We've got about 300 hectares at the moment. That is still, because that's our only reliable revenue stream. So that's just been wheat, sheep farming, and we've probably got about about 1,000 sheep, I think, grazing on. So we've designed in one of our plantings, 70 hectares, we've got a native fodder feed system. So with that, it's rather than relying on the cropping and the stubble, and the grasses that cropping cycle would produce. We've planted a whole lot of bush foods that we think, that we know, that we can eat. So we figured, if we can eat them as humans, then surely the sheep would have a crack at it and maybe like it. So we've got 70 hectares there, which we believe is a pretty good example of regenerative ag from a Nyoongar perspective, in a Nyoongar context. So we're using native grasses, native plants, native species to provide a food source, and we think, based on what Heidi was just saying, are really healthy. Some of these species are actually superfoods, to be honest. So we think that the livestock would benefit enormously from the nutritional value, and obviously it's going to be a lot more tasty. And so what we've found is, in the 3 years that we've had this, because the first 2 years was just allowing those plants to get established. So in the last 18 months, we've had sheep in there, and they most definitely having a good crack at those species. So, in terms of your question, they're the important things we wanted, because certainly I've changed my tune a little bit, because when I first started, I was just completely, like zero tolerance for farming, whitefly farming. And I was not interested in a farmer's perspective and their view of their world, because I'd grown up in that anyway. I was out all the time with my dad and my uncles in the shearing shed and on the tractors working on those farms. And I saw the damage that they had done and have been doing to our country over this 200 years. So, but no one has really. I think there's a little bit of growth. We've had a couple of events in the Beverley Shire, in the Beverley Town Hall, where we talked about, we presented what we did, but we talked about regenerative ag, and Ian and Heidi, who are probably the most well-known regenerative ag farmers out at Whadjuk. They came down and participated. I've sat on the steering committee for the state's regenerative ag committee for 12 months or so, 18 months. So I know that network of farmers who are very proactive in that space. And they have come, certainly, but they're not farmers around me. These are people that are involved across the southwest, particularly in regenerative ag as an alternative to the broadacre farming. And they are the regenerative ag farmers are very interested in what we're doing. So from that perspective, yes. But farmers that drive pretty much through our property, because we're on a highway, on a daily basis, no one's pulled in or no one's rung me and said, "What are you doing there?" There's probably been more comments of negative comments. What are you doing? Bloody good. That's good cropping country, sort of thing. Which is a shame, because I think that look, Kingsley Dixon and Peter Clinton said to me, Kingsley's one of the preeminent scientists in WA. Kingsley made a statement to me that we as humans have got 60 harvests left. That's it. If we don't change the way that we are practicing this agriculture, this form of agriculture that we are doing here in Australia, and I said to him, I challenged him, I said, I don't think we've got 60 years in the wheat belt. We'd be lucky if we've got 30. And then he said, yeah, well, remember there's a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere. So effectively he's saying 30, so that's 30 years of farming. Right? He's one of the chief scientists in WA. So farmers must change the way that they are practicing their cropping and their grazing and this broadacre activity. They must replenish the country with more plantings and some form of regenerative agriculture and some form of rehabilitation of the land, because the biodiversity issues, the issues of soil and salinity, and obviously the drying climate on top of it all impacting and coming to a crescendo of disaster. So once, and we already know this, that the ecological systems, the natural systems, as they start to, we lose certain species, and then suddenly the whole system collapses. Right. So I think that's essentially what Kingsley was saying, is that in 30 years, the whole natural system will collapse. Larissa?
I reckon it's less.
Yep, I agree. So
I'd like to be a stubborn optimist, but
yeah, and it's disastrous, right? We are on the third 2030 trajectory for climate change or zero emissions, net emissions, is people are still thinking that trajectory, right? Being led by the government and the politicians. And the pastoralists and farmers and miners and all sorts of powerful people. But the trajectory is very quickly getting higher and higher, and soon it'll be here. So we shouldn't be sitting on our laurels thinking that 2030 is still 8 years away, 7 years away. We need to be doing stuff. And I've often sat with the regen ag people, and over the last 3 years, and I did this after the first 12 months when I said, we must put Boodjar first. Right? The principle of our cultural ways is country first. If it's not good for country, you don't do it. And so, in speaking with the regen ag people, after 12 months, I said, what did you do in the last, or in this 12 months just gone, since I said that to you, what did you do this year where you put country first? And they all sort of went, didn't say anything. So no one is changing quickly, including regen ag people. The broad acre people, farmers, and it's not, I'm not anti-farmers in that sense. I'm anti their practices, right? Because it's so destructive. And it's market driven, and it's yield and market and profit, and it's all about the viability of their business practices, which I understand have to be, but there's no point worrying about money or your profits if nothing is going to grow anymore. And you only have to go out to around the Merredin area, the eastern wheat belt. We know that there's 2 million hectares of country that's turning to desert like this. And soon that's going to be, by 2030, it could be 5 million hectares that nothing will grow on. Right. So that drying climate, if you look at any of the heat maps that scientists are producing, it's travelling 30 kilometres almost in every couple of years, right? It's not a constant or steady rate or quantifiable rate, but I believe that it's come 30 k's in a very short period of time. So when you start thinking the rain, we know this in the southwest forests, that our forests are drying. The treetops are showing, of our old growth forest is showing very severe stress. And this is happening globally. I believe that the Black Forest in Germany is also having that same thing. We see wildfires in Amsterdam and London, bushfires, as unheard of. So climate change is very real. No one, I just switch off when I hear people. I hear farmers say it all the time, oh yeah, but So we've got to have, we just got to be real. We need truth telling about climate change. And people need to speak the truth from a personal point of view. If you're drawn towards the finances associated, or the markets, or the profitability of what you're doing, and I hear farmers say this all the time. Well, but it's got to be viable. If it's not viable, why would we do it? We can't do it. And I understand that in a business sense, but in an environmental sense, it's foolish. So, yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much. Thanks, Heidi. That was an amazing session. once again. And so if people have time now, we've got a session back at the Spectrum Gallery, and the artists are going to be talking and talking a bit more about the show. But once again, it's just been exceptional and a real treat actually for me, having worked at the Department of Ag and been sort of talking about this stuff a lot. It's just really refreshing to hear this voice, and it's great. So thank you.
Yeah. Right, thanks.
Thank you.
It might be, it actually would be good. I don't know if people heard of ESG and Natural Capital Accounting, those two.
What's the best of it?
So I'm just wondering who's heard of, you know, the stuff that you specialise in, the area that you're working in, Larissa. Natural capital accounting and you know, environmental, social governance, ESG. Has anyone heard what these things are?
ESG, I have a second.
Yeah. So, you know, so we've got carbon, and people know that carbon trading and, you know, emissions and offsetting your carbon emissions through planting trees and doing all sorts of stuff, you know, which is good for the environment. So these are incentivised systems and frameworks that measure both, you know, the negative impacts, but also, you know, in finding solutions, which is really important because we've got to be, we can't just complain all the time, we've got to find better ways to feed ourselves. We can't just, you know, I understand, I don't bag farmers for what they do. What I'm saying is, you've got to get better at it, and you've got to shift your focus from, you know, this broad acre stuff where you clear everything and then take the soil and the land back to zero, and then fertilise it and boost it up so you can grow your crop to sell, because that's not feeding us. That's it. You know, they're selling it mostly to overseas markets. So, you know, the issue of food production is critical, because if our farms and our farming system or our agricultural system you know, folds or becomes inefficient, then what are we going to do for food as West Australians? So we all need farmers to be better, but there's an urgency about nature and the land itself. So the ESG and the natural capital accounting are about frameworks that, you know, essentially we hope will influence, you know, at a high political level, and we hope a high commercial or corporate level, how better solutions can be found, and innovation around food production and other, you know, other land management or environmental management systems are done. So if you Google those things and have a look at them, because I think it's really important for people to know about those things. So natural capital accounting is really putting a value on nature and saying that, you know, we can actually, you know, as Thomas worked, you know, we should be putting the amount of trees or the amount of biodiversity in nature that is healthy, putting that in your, your balance sheet, putting a value to it, so that, you know, we can say, well, we're not growing wheat, but we're growing, you know, healthy, biodiverse, and ecological healthy systems. You know, which is what we do. We get nothing for that at the moment, as, you know, our property. So it's incentivising, you know, farmers and land managers and you know, shires and governments at all levels, or landholders and land managers, to actually manage and support, you know, the better management of biodiversity and ecological threatened species and systems. So, but good. Thank you. Thank you.